Welcome back to Close Up. At the State House in Concord, the Legislative Office Building is not quite the hive of activity it normally would be at this time of year, but lawmakers are still making progress as the session kicks into gear. The State Senate is fully remote and conducting hearings via Zoom. This morning, Senate President Chuck Morse and the Democratic leader, Senator Donna Soucy, are here to discuss some of the top issues in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you to both of you for joining us, and let's jump right in. Senator Morse, your caucus has identified as a top priority on its agenda election law and how New Hampshire votes. Now, Secretary Bill Gardner did an exhaustive investigation 4 years ago, determined voter fraud was a tiny fraction of the entire universe of votes cast in New Hampshire. But you have your concerns. Your agenda says ensure honest elections. What's the problem as you see it?
Well, I think the people in New Hampshire want to make sure that we make every effort that their vote counts. I think you'll see things like making sure that people have to have some form of ID to vote. That's an important piece of what's happening. Matching signatures to people that are mailing in ballots. Those are things that we want to talk about, we want to have debates about, and we want to ensure the people in New Hampshire that it's all happening.
Senator Soucy, what are your thoughts on some of these added concepts into the voting process? And you're also backing this time around expanded absentee voting.
Yes, I think what you said initially is very important. Secretary Bill Gardner, very well respected, has looked at the issue of voter fraud, and people in New Hampshire, without a doubt, can have a great deal of confidence in our election process. It's run by local election officials and the Secretary of State, and they should be very confident about it. I think what we need to do is look at the lessons that we learned from November 2020 in particular. And I think that election ran smoothly. More people participated than ever before. And I think affording people the opportunity to vote the same way that they did in the November 2020 election is what we should be doing. It's what Granite Staters expect, and it still will ensure safe and secure elections.
What's your perspective on that, Mr. Senate President, in terms of no-fault absentee? We had it this last time around. Was that a problem for you? It seemed to work okay.
Well, I honestly believe we have to go to matching up signatures, and we will talk about that. I think that's one thing when you have a great election like we just had. You have the opportunity to see, when you get more voters, things that the public gets concerned about, and that's what the Senate's going to take up. They're going to make sure that the public's confident in the process.
Senator Morse, let's talk tax cuts. What do you want to reduce? What do you want to get rid of? And how do you still adjust the bottom line and provide the services New Hampshire needs at the same time?
Well, I think the Senate's always been very strong on making sure we meet the priorities of the people in the state of New Hampshire, and we'll do that through the budget phase. And as we talk about tax cuts, I mean, I think the governor's made it clear that rooms and meals tax is something that he wants to address. We obviously are struggling with small businesses right now in the food industry, the hotel industry. We want to send a message that New Hampshire's open for business there. So we'll look at that. And I certainly don't believe in the budget that's going to come out you're going to see any caps on the reduction in business taxes, because it's worked. It's produced more money in the state of New Hampshire because we work with businesses and we cut taxes. And I think as we do learn lessons from 2020, that's one lesson that is working right now, and we should move forward with reducing taxes.
Senator Morse, do you support the elimination of capital gains? I know they're looking at that in the House right now.
Well, I think the reality is we will not support increasing capital gains. We won't support an income tax, and we won't support a sales tax. I think those have been things that have made very clear that are not going to happen.
What about you, Senator Soucy? Arguably, businesses do need all the help they can get these days, but is this the time to cut taxes right now?
Well, we have cut business taxes. We did it in the last budget cycle, and I think what we need to do is look at what the priorities are of the state. And right now, planning to continue our way to manage through COVID-19 and also providing relief and recovery going forward is what's going to be critical. We need to do things to ensure that families and businesses aren't overburdened, and simply cutting business taxes isn't going to do that because it won't allow us to maintain what we have as priorities in our budget. So we should look at ways such as Senator Rosenwald's bill to increase the amount restaurants and lodging can keep when when they're collecting the business tax, the rooms and meals tax, we should be looking at ways that we can continue to maintain some of those important priorities that right now are even more important during COVID.
Senator Morse, we know education savings accounts are a top priority for Republicans. How do you work around the state constitution here, which prevents public tax dollars from going to private religious schools?
Well, I think there's a lot going on in education, and I think it's important to talk about everything in education, because we're going to assure the towns that we understand what they're going through right now with, the fact that they free and reduced lunch, students aren't in school. There's several pieces of legislation right now that are going to be addressed to help with the fact that we believe local communities need our help right now. Senator Birdsall had a piece that was passed in Ways and Means. Aaron Hennessy has a piece that's coming that's a major piece of legislation that I think will straighten out the counts that are going on in the state that, by law, these local school districts have to use the numbers they have now, but I can assure them we'll be there to make sure that it works for the state of New Hampshire. As for all the different categories that I believe we can create opportunity in this state, 2020's proven that we need to create opportunity for everyone. Every student and every parent should have the ability to make sure that education is delivered in the way they see fit, and that's what we're going to work on.
Senator Soucy, we know this is a fight you want to win for public schools, but at the same time, because of the pandemic, you have more parents than ever looking for alternatives because they believe that schools should be more open than they are right now. So why not give them more options?
Well, look, education savings accounts, which was your initial question, are not constitutional. And I think what we have to look at is all schools. I think a lot of the Republican legislation focuses and prioritizes charter schools. We need to look at all schools, public schools across the state. We need to look at short-term solutions because we do recognize as a result of the pandemic, many children are not registered for classes. But we also have to look beyond that and how we continue to fund public education so that every child has an opportunity to thrive and succeed. And there are different programs within our existing school structure that will provide opportunities for every child.
Let's talk a little bit about public safety right now. Obviously, bail reform was the big change that happened in 2018 that passed with bipartisan support, with promises of a fairer and stronger justice system. Many believe it didn't live up to that. In fact, the opposite. A lot of people argue it's become a revolving door for jails and for police departments, folks who are arrested. There was a little bit of a repeal and replace last year, but there's going to be another look at this. And Senator Morse, do you believe it's time for this particular experiment to end?
Yes, I strongly believe that, we need to make sure that the streets in the state of New Hampshire stay safe. And that's an important part of, the Republican agenda. I think as we have these discussions, the governor led with a committee that certainly looked into a whole bunch of things in law enforcement that I think we need to have strong discussions on in the state of New Hampshire. And that's where we're headed. I think you're going to see that this year. And the whole purpose of it is to make sure the streets are safe in the state of New Hampshire and that we support law enforcement.
Senator Soucy, what's your perspective on this? Obviously, Manchester, one of the communities hardest hit here, Mayor Joyce Craig came out in 2019, I believe, around Labor Day, and basically said bail reform is one of the key problems in terms of the homeless issue downtown. So is it time to make a full repeal here? Sure.
I don't think it's time to make a full repeal. I think what it's time to do is act as legislators and continue to bring the stakeholders around the table. What we can't lose sight of is the initial reason for bail reform, which was that people who had not yet even been convicted of crimes were simply sitting in jail because of the fact that they had no money in their pocket. And that was wrong, and we knew that was wrong, and bail reform was an attempt to correct that. Do we need to make perhaps some revisions to it? Yes, I think that is the case, but we're not going to do it by simply repealing all of the hard work that was done to address what was a very significant problem. And I think we have to look at all of the reforms that were proposed in the governor's task force. There's a lot of good work that was done, and many of those things I think will be adopted this session.
I'm curious, as we wrap up here, redistricting is going to be a huge issue, even though it's far off on the horizon. We're talking months away. Senate President Morse, are you willing to approve a map that just dramatically redraws, in particular, the congressional districts? We've heard NHGOP Chairman Steve Stepanek say essentially there's going to be a Republican heading to Congress in 2020. That would indicate that you guys are looking at a pretty dramatic redraw of the map.
Yeah, let me be clear. We don't even have the census numbers in the state of New Hampshire right now. The Senate has always worked hard to keep honor and respect in the institution. That's how we'll treat redistricting in the state of New Hampshire. Remember, the public elects us, and when we do redistricting, the public's going to be looking at integrity, and they'll certainly support the fact that I think the Senate will work through this and they'll do it the right way, and we're not going to get started talking about this till sometime this summer. I've had many people calling me with opinions, and that's exactly what they are right now. But we have a budget to do. We certainly know that we have to work with the governor on COVID, and we want to make sure that we get this economy up and running. And that's what I'm concerned about right now, and that's what we're going to focus on.
Senator Soucy, quick rebuttal there.
Yeah, Chairman Stepanek's remarks were very unfortunate, and I think, set a bad tone for this process. One thing that happened last session was the support by both Democrats and Republicans of an independent redistricting commission, a commission that would have experts and provide informed information to help us pass a piece of legislation that draws fair districts. People expect fairness, and they expect transparency in this process as well. And Senator Sherman has a bill that would do just that. I hope those that supported it in the past will do so, and I hope we can encourage the governor to realize that free and fair elections are what the people of New Hampshire demand.
All right, Senator Soucy and Senate President Morse, thank you so much for joining us this Sunday morning. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Adam.